I discovered something was wrong in my marriage before I knew about the affair. He began to pressure me to get another car, like a sports car. And I was like, that's very strange. What do we need a sports car for? We have 4 kids. And he declined the call. And I said, why did you decline the call? And he's like, oh, it's a customer and I'll call him back. But in English, the name is a girl's name. In Spanish, it could be a boy's name. And so I was like, no, something isn't right. That all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. And I was like, even this, God can turn around for my good.
Hello, and welcome back to the Emerge Stronger podcast. My name is Sonia, and I am with my co-host Melody today. Hey, Melody.
Hey.
And today we thought that we would kind of take the podcast in a little bit of a different direction. Not bad, but I think a lot of times we talk about our stories just in conversation, but there's probably some listeners that actually have never heard our stories before. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to spend some time to learn a little bit more about you and your journey and everything that you went through. This will likely be a 2-part because we can't fit it all in one session, but that's what we're doing today. How's that sound?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
All right. Okay, so I want us to start off with, I'm gonna be asking you a lot of questions.
Okay.
So the first question is, can you walk me back to the moment that you discovered that there was something wrong in your marriage?
I discovered something was wrong in my marriage before I knew about the affair. So I felt a lot of distance from him. He was in the middle of doing a big project. He's an electrician and he had this big apartment complex that he was wiring, and he was working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And that has an effect on your body. You get tired. Sometimes you get irritable. And I did notice that. At the same time, I was raising our kids, working full time. I was in school full time. And so it was a lot of disconnection happening. And even towards the end of the job that he was working, I could feel that he was distant. He wanted to not come home until the wee hours of the night and stuff like that. And I just assumed that he was working, but there was something else going on. And then it moved into, after the job was done, he wanted to go see his uncle in Austin or near Austin. But then it became every weekend. And I was like, why do you want to spend so much time with your uncle? So it was beginning to be suspicious. And of course, I was taking it as he doesn't want to be with me. He doesn't want to spend time with me. And so I was growing increasingly frustrated with the whole thing as well.
Looking back, and you did mention you were working full time. He was working a lot, busy. You've got young kids, you've got a young family. And so the dynamics of your home sound it sounds normal, what we go through as you're raising children. Maybe not so normal that you work 7 days a week, 12-hour days. However, it's not completely unheard of. So looking back at that, what do you think you would do differently? Or is there anything that you would do differently? Because sometimes life is just life and it is what it is.
Yeah, I do think that I would do things differently. Number one, I would have addressed the distance and said something like, I feel distant from you. Can we rekindle, come back together, spend some time together? Can you take one day off or a couple of days off? I think that I probably would have been far more in tune to his needs as well. Because I'm a task-oriented person, it's like, I got to take care of these deeds before I can take care of your needs. That's how I've approached a lot of things. And he is more of a people person, more of a connection person. And I'm just not as much like that. And I remember him having these small bids of, hey, come sit with me and watch TV. And I was like, I've got laundry to do. I got to clean the kitchen. I got to do this. I got to get the baby in bed, all those types of things. And I just neglected our relationship. And so I would have done those things differently, although I don't know that even doing those things would have prevented an affair. It may have, I don't know that, but it may not have either.
Outside of what you just described, just the busy family life and both working full time, was there anything significant that happened maybe in your life and his life prior to all of this that maybe could have caused a shift in behavior for
Mhm.
either one of you?
Yes, definitely. About 3 years, it's always that time period, right? It is always somewhere between 1 and 3 years. I lost my dad. And then
Mhm.
a few months later, he lost his dad. And then maybe a year after that, we lost my brother. And my husband loved my dad, loved my brother, and then, of course, his dad too. And there was a lot of unresolved things with his dad. He loved his dad, but he really wasn't raised by his dad. He didn't have a connection with him. And I think he had always hoped that once we got to a place financially where he could go back and see his dad and form a relationship, that he wanted to do that. And it was almost, he almost felt like he was robbed of that because his dad passed away. And also, this is terribly sad, but the night before his dad passed away, he had tried to call David and David missed the call. I think we were
Mm.
probably sleeping or something. And so when he found out the next morning he passed away, he carried a tremendous amount of guilt for not answering that call.
Wow, that
Yeah.
is really sad. I did not
Mhm.
know that.
Yeah.
To be honest, I have a feeling that I'm going to learn a lot more than I already think I know in this story. So there
Yeah,
we go. That's
maybe
one of
so.
them. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So now let's fast forward to you suspected something was going
Mhm.
on. Take me back to when you actually found out.
I suspected something was going on because I said there was a lot of change in his behavior. He began to pressure me to get another car, like a sports car. And I was like, that's very strange. What do we need a sports car for? We have 4 kids. It didn't make any sense to me. He began to obsessively work out, and he worked out all the time anyway. He would spend an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours at the gym per day, but it became 3 and 4 hours. Then he started smoking cigarettes, which was weird. And I was like, what? And then he started drinking more. And honestly, in the time before all this happened, I had never seen him drunk. And I had only seen him drink maybe 3 or 4 times in several years. And so it was weird that was happening. Of course, his phone began to be in his pocket and all that kind of thing. And then one day we were driving to Houston and he gets a phone call and the name of the person comes up on our CarPlay. And I was like, I don't know if it was called CarPlay then. I don't even know if they had CarPlay back then, but it was connected to our car. Anyway, and he declined the call, which was so weird because my husband always answers his phone. Like 99.9% of the time, David's going to answer his phone. That's just who he is. He doesn't care who's calling, he just does. And he declined the call. And I said, why did you decline the call? And he's like, oh, it's a customer and I'll call him back. But in English, the it the name is a girl's name. In Spanish, it could be a boy's name. And so I was like, no, something isn't right. But because it did not have a Spanish or Hispanic last name, it was definitely an American last name. Anyway, so I just kind of tucked that in my pocket. And then a couple of weeks later, his friend told me that he was
Oh,
having conversations with a woman and he was telling her he loved her and all of that. And of course, that caused a bit of a rift between him and the other person. But he was like, Mel deserves to know the truth and all of that. So that's how I kind of found
wow.
out, which then devastated me, of course. It just completely broke my heart. But
Yeah. And what was it like confronting him about it?
he was in Austin with her actually when I found out, and I tried to call him and he initially answered, and I was like distraught. And he quickly hung up the phone. And I tried to call him several more times and he wouldn't answer. I tried to text him and he wouldn't answer because he had been caught. Or really, I don't even think he knew how to handle it, especially if he was with her. And so it was several days before I could actually even talk to him because he just ignored. It was like on the weekend, I think it was maybe a Thursday, and he didn't come home until Monday. So I was sitting with that for several days which was
Mhm.
miserable. It was a miserable thing because when you have something like that, it was a miserable thing, but it was probably a good thing because I was able to calm down quite a bit and gain some focus, although can quickly lose it back and forth and all of that. Anyway, yeah.
In those first days, first couple days that you found out, and like you just described, by the time he came home, you were able to calm down. But in that moment, feeling in despair, was there anybody that you reached out to lean on for support?
No, I didn't. I was distraught, but the other thing was I was embarrassed because at
Mm.
that point in time I was blaming myself and I'm not good enough and all that kind of thing and all these things running through my mind and I couldn't talk to anybody about it. There was so much shame around it. It was like I got to keep it to myself.
Yeah. And so then when he got home, I guess describe what that was like and how you handled him coming home and confronting him face to
Yeah.
face.
It was more he was trying to avoid having that conversation. And so he started acting like he hated me and I
Mhm.
wasn't expecting that. And so that disdain that I felt coming off of him, whether it was truly there or not, but that's what I perceived was going on. I really kind of avoided it at first and didn't say anything. And then after a couple of days, it was like, how could you do this to me? This is so painful. And he was like, I just want to be by myself. I just want to be by myself. I want to move out. I want to live in a house away from everything with a long driveway. And mainly because he was like, I don't want to see who's coming down the road type thing. But anyway, he just kept saying he wanted to live by himself. And I was just like, but we made a covenant and we have children. And none of that mattered to him at that point. He just wanted to get away from me. And he had said early on in our relationship, and then said this again when all this was going on, that love only lasts 2 or 3 years. And I was like, what are you talking about? It only lasts 2 or 3 years. We've been together way past that. And I still love you. But he would say things like, I don't love you like a wife. I don't love you the way a man should love a woman. I care about you, but I'm not in love with you. Yeah.
It's a classic I love you, but I'm not in love with you.
Yes. We hear it all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Okay. So how long after this happened did he eventually move out?
Yeah. It was about 3 months and I had asked him to leave. And the main thing is that I am not typically an emotional person, but everybody has their thing that will just break them. And this was my thing. I was just so broken over it. And I remember feeling somewhat peaceful in a sense when he wasn't there. Although other side of that is that he was with her. And so that created a lot of anxiety. But when he would come home, it was even worse because, again, he was acting like he hated me and he never cussed me out or told me I was a terrible person. It was always, you're a good person. I just don't feel the same way about you when we would talk about things. But he was staying out late, talking to her, didn't want to be at the house. And then when he did come home, it was, he just acted like he hated me. He wouldn't speak to me, wouldn't look at me, just really weird because we were still sleeping in the same bed at that
Hmm.
point in time. So it was very awkward. He was like on one end of the bed and I was on the other end of the bed. At that time our house was super small, so there was really no other place to sleep unless it was the couch. And I was like, I'm not giving up my bed. And yeah, so it was real stressful. And then one day while he was gone, I made the decision that he needed to leave for my own peace. And I really felt that's what God wanted me to do, to get me by myself with God, because that's really what needed to happen. And so when he came home, I just said, I can't do this, you going back and forth and all that. So if I don't know what you're doing, it'll actually be better for me. And the crazy thing now is that he took that as a form of rejection in a sense. And I think for a long time, he would say, I'm never coming back there. I'm never coming back there because I guess because this was my house before we got together. And it just made sense because, for him to move in with me because I had a bigger home and he had roommates and stuff like that. So we weren't going to move there. So he moved here. And I think for some reason he had that you have control and I don't like that. And so he was like, I'm never coming back. I'm never coming home. And I do think that he sensed that as like a rejection. It wasn't meant
Interesting.
that way, but
Yeah.
but I had to have some peace to be able to get a hold of myself emotionally.
Yeah. Talk to me about your spirituality and your walk with God during this
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
Were you angry with God? Did you immediately turn to
Mhm.
God? What did that look
Mhm.
like for you?
Yeah, I definitely immediately turned to God. Long before me and David got together, I really began to seek God like I had never had before. It was probably around 28, 29 years old. My life had fallen apart and all that. And I was just like, I really have to just seek the Lord because I knew that was where I had peace. And I began to serve the Lord and didn't date for a long time. I had one guy that I dated for a few years, but then we broke up. So there was a long period of time of no dating anyone between my that one boyfriend and David. And I'd really began to walk with the Lord. And then David came into my life and it disrupted it in a sense of I still got up and read my Bible and prayed and did all of that. But I really put David on the throne of my heart
Mm,
and not God. And I remember praying, even right maybe a few months before all this happened, Lord, I want you to be on the throne of my heart. I don't want anybody else to be. And I recognized I had healed enough where I recognized that I was definitely putting David above God. And that looked like I didn't hold David accountable for things. I was afraid if I said something or did something that he would be mad at me. I would ditch my family to do what he wanted me to do and all of that. And I just remember living in fear a lot. And it wasn't necessarily anything that there were a few things that David did. I was never physically afraid of him, but I was afraid he was going to leave me. That was the underlying fear that he was going to leave me. I had been through enough heartache in the past that fear definitely developed. But for the most part, that was just what was going on in me. I didn't want to be abandoned again. And I thought, if I'm abandoned again, then there is something wrong with me. And how do I fix that? So there was a lot of subconscious thoughts rolling around in my head. And so I really essentially was putting David above God in many ways. And I think it took this for me to switch that. And
mm,
so I did immediately run to God and of course begged and pleaded with God to change the situation and all that kind of thing. And he didn't change it immediately. It was a long time. It was 6 years before God really changed it in terms of reconciliation. But all along those 6 years, I was changing and David was changing.
yeah.
You don't feel it when you're in the middle of the situation, but when you get to the end and reconciliation happens, you look back and you're like, wow, what the change. There's just a lot of change that took place.
Yeah. Walk me through what made you decide to stand for your marriage instead of leaving. Because I think a
Hmm.
lot of people would look, and I think a lot of people do. You've even done a clip on it. They called me
Hmm.
stupid for standing.
Hmm.
And a lot of people would look at your situation and say, I would never stand for that long.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what did that look like for you, that
Yeah.
decision?
I think it evolved over time. Initially, the first was because I loved David. I was in love with him and I didn't want to lose him at all. And so that was initially the first. Love will only take you so far. And then you have to have more reasons because when there's not a whole lot of reciprocity, you fall out of love with a person. It doesn't mean that you can't still have love for them, but the love actually changes. And so that it did that for me as well because there was no reciprocity. He would do things like come fix the AC or come see the kids, but then talk to me and things like that. But they were so few and far between that wasn't enough. My in love was not enough to sustain my journey. And so then it kind of shifted to my kids. My older two kids are from a previous marriage, and I had seen their life be negatively affected by not having their dad in their life. Now they're great kids. They've never, I feel, and I've said this many times, I feel like God had grace on me and gave me great children because he knew that I was going to go through hell in the other areas of my life. And the typical statistics that happen to kids when they're from a broken home or raised by their mother did not happen with my kids. It did not happen. Now, we were in church all the time. And so God definitely had his hand on the situation, but I didn't have to deal with some of the other things. But it did become, I don't want the others to be raised without their dad. And then it moved to, I really believe that's what God wanted me to do. I felt called, and but not only just that, because it wasn't just about David, it was about me too. It was like, this is what has to happen in order for me to choose to put God on the throne of my heart. It could not be any other scenario. It had to be this one. I didn't know that then, but now looking, I'm like, yes, I see why this whole thing had to happen. And then it kind of moved into God will forgive me if I divorce. And so I will. But when I got to that place, it was like more about if this ever reconciles, what a great story it would be. And so, and I somewhere probably early on in the separation and all that, I had a passion to help other people go through what I went through.
I want to pause for just a second on something that you said, and you said it a couple times that David had the throne of your heart and God didn't. And I think a lot of times people don't recognize where they're putting their focus and their attention. And even as Christians, we can feel, of course, we love God. Of course, we, follow God. But then we put so much focus and attention in our children or our husbands, and we kind of get the order wrong.
Yeah.
And our pastor last Sunday was talking about idols, and he listed 4 things that we idolize. And one of them was comfort, the other one was approval, and then control, and then power. And so I think it's just important for people to understand and to really ask the question, what are you focusing on, and what are you idolizing more than God? And I can see that in this situation, Melody, when you were in the thick of it, and it's really easy for people because they want to control the situation. And so their focus is off of God, and their focus is, I've got to get my spouse back. I've got to figure out how to do this.
Yeah.
So I think I just wanted to bring that up as you recognized that you did have to shift that.
Yeah. And at that particular time, like all of the things that I did, every single thing that I did in the beginning was very much to get David back. That was my singular focus. And we always recommend that people don't have that as a motivation. It could be secondary or down the line somewhere, but your main focus has to be, you want to be the best version of yourself. You truly want God to be on the throne of your heart. And it did shift over time. And I think the longest thing it took me to do is trust God, even if David never came home. Because it was like, I know, Lord, that you can change his heart. I know that you can bring him home. I trust that you can do that. But it's like, will you trust me if I don't? And that was very hard to get to that place. And I think that's what took 6 years. I honestly think that. Now, again, David was on his own journey, and it took him a long time to get to the place of surrender to God as well. But for a long time, I fought that really surrendering, no matter what the outcome is, to God. And the things that a lot of things that I did that were good. Of course, there were things that I did that were bad as well. I lost focus and had to refocus and all that kind of thing. But I think the main journey was, will you trust me even if I don't? Which a lot of us go through that. A lot of us go through, if it's a loss of a spouse or a loss of a child, or will you trust me? Will you love me even if I don't?
Yeah. Yeah. Over the 6 years that you stood for your marriage, at what points in time did you see David wrestling on the other side, maybe with the relationship with the other person or even just with himself? And when you saw that, did you see him coming back, excuse me, coming back towards you?
Yes. The first time I saw it was probably about 14 months in. If limerence is, it's definitely a cycle, but he was in the height of limerence the first year and a couple of months, and then they broke up. And that's when I really started seeing the struggle. Now, the struggle initially looked like mourning for her because they had broken up, and they did eventually get back together several months down the road. But he had learned enough to be a safe place for him. Some of that actually did come out of fears, like I don't want to say anything or try to hold him accountable because it's going to push him away, which it would have. And there's so many times when I'm like, oh, if I could have gone back and done that a little better, I would. But ultimately, it was like everything that needed to happen happened in the timing that it needed to happen. I don't look back with regret anymore because it was necessary. The 6 years was necessary. But he would come closer to me when things were bad between them. He would lean into me and share some things with me about her, and never really say he wanted to break up, but he would talk to me, and then it would cause my expectations to go up. And so then when he would go back over there with her, post something on social media or go on a trip, I was so devastated because I was like, oh, I thought this was the end. And that's one of the things that if your spouse is in limerence, you have to understand there's a lot of back and forth. You do not allow your expectations to increase as much as you can. Nobody's perfect, and so it is going to happen sometimes, but wait until you hear them say, I want to come home. And then you can have some expectations, I think, are you can get your hopes up a little bit. But even at that, you have to stay very grounded, because how many times have we seen people have false starts or end up divorcing because it didn't work out and all of that. So he did come to me, and as time went on, he became closer and closer to me, and I became his best friend. And so then he shared everything with me, even some things I didn't necessarily want to hear.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So at what point in your journey did you learn about limerence?
Probably, let's say, I don't know, maybe 6 months into it, maybe not even that long. Maybe it was 3 months into it, now that I think about it, because we had one significant event that happened, and I became very angry with him, and I punched him in the arm 3 times. And of course, he was very gracious and told me I was trying to make you mad, and I could not believe that I hit him. And so I was like, if this would have been flipped, I would have drove his butt to the police station. Now, obviously, he's a big, strong guy or whatever. He did say his shoulder hurt a little bit, but I didn't leave a bruise or anything. I'm not trying to justify it was wrong or anything and all of that. But when we got home, I was like, I need help. And so then I Googled how do I save my marriage and got connected with an organization, and that organization taught me about limerence. So many times, though, you want to learn more and more about it, and it's good to learn about it because then you can understand, because it's like a roller coaster of emotions for your spouse. And it just helped, understanding it helped me say, okay, this is normal. And they say that limerence always ends, and it does, it always ends. And so this craziness that's happening will not always be happening. And so I kind of held on to that.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever asked you this question, and I was thinking about it. Why I did ask you what made you stand, and you stood for so long, but why didn't David choose divorce to
Yeah.
go be with the other woman?
Yeah.
I guess he was
So
already with her, but to just
yeah.
say, I'm going to finalize this.
Yeah. So he delayed it a lot. I think that she put quite the pressure on him to actually divorce me. And I think the kids and this and that, there are things that came up or whatever. But after their relationship, which was about 3 years into my stand, finally, like it was over for good, I asked him that. I said, "Why did you never file for divorce?" And he said, "I knew deep down inside of me that this was not going to last. And I didn't want to lose you both." Now, beyond that, now I know when he was feeling like the relationship was coming to an end, so he began to do whatever he could to make the relationship work. And they started looking for a house together in Austin. And I think he did contact an attorney about filing for divorce. They were just going to move there. But by that time, she was already kind of seeing somebody else on the side. And of course, I don't think he knew that right away, but later on he found out. And so she was like, "You haven't divorced her. It's been too long. It's over." And so at that point in time, it was like, why get divorced? And I really just think that he didn't do it because I think all along, maybe deep inside, he knew he was going to come home and he didn't want to let me go. We were just having a conversation on Sunday and he was like, "You are my safe place. You are my peace when I come home." Not saying that God isn't, but he's like, "It's peaceful and I can share things with you that I can't share with anybody else. And you love me, good, bad, and ugly." And I think he even knew that back then because we had enough
Mm-hmm.
conversations where he would tell me whatever he would tell me when he would leave. I'd be like, "Oh my God, really?" I can't believe we're having this conversation. But I just tried to be real calm about it and listen to it's accept how he felt about things. And if you ever talk to Renee and Adele, she'll talk about that too, because they had one significant evening where he just spilled the beans on everything and she just kind of just sat there and held it in, and then she went to go spend time with God for 3 hours, and then she came out and everything was peaceful. Not saying that everything
Mm-hmm.
was okay, because there were still a lot of things to address and all that, but everything was peaceful. In other words, she did not attack him, reject him, freak out, or anything like that. And the same thing was for me. Mine just was
Yeah.
over a prolonged period of time and not just one event.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that because I was going to ask you, what does that mean to be a safe place? Not because I don't know, but
Yeah.
because other people may
Yeah.
not clearly understand what that
Mm-hmm.
means. And I think it's important to define that because
Mm-hmm.
there are things that you learned how to do that other people don't have that opportunity to
Mm-hmm.
learn how to do them.
Mm-hmm.
It's either going to make or break things in a
Yeah.
sense. It's
Mm-hmm.
either going to push them further
Yeah.
away or it's just going to calm the waters. And
Yeah.
so there isn't any tension.
Being a safe place means that you offer acceptance, not agreement. It does not mean you have to agree with everything that the other person is saying, but you offer acceptance for how they think, feel, believe, and act. Again, that doesn't mean that if they're acting out. So, for example, David was drinking a lot during this time, and there were many times when he was drunk, he would come here. I don't really know why it was, but when he would come here, it would disrupt obviously my sleep. It would disrupt the kids, and then I'd have to get up and go to work the next day or something. And I drew a boundary and just said, "Hey, you're welcome to come here to see the kids anytime, but you can't come drunk." And so you've got to find another place to go whenever that's happening. I don't know if you go back to your place or what. And he honored that. He would not come here after I set the boundary. And so you don't have to approve of behavior, but you do have to accept. And so when he would tell me things like, "I love her so much. I don't know, say, I understand how you feel." And or if he would get frustrated about something with the kids, I'd be like, "I understand how you feel." If he would get mad at me, I tried to very rarely did he get mad at me, but when he would get mad at me, I always, even if I got angry, we always just kind of came back. We did a lot of repair in the relationship, and Gottman talks a lot about that. It's not necessarily the way that you fight, although the way that you fight does really matter in the long run. And it's not even how many fights you have. It's more about, do you come back and repair? And we were always really good at that. And we're even still good at that today, where we repair. And what we know is that the spouse in my position does not have to be perfect. right? I'll always want to strive for excellence and really apply. And you would be amazed how much emotional maturity will happen in you whenever you begin to practice being that safe place, not only for your spouse, but also your children. But it's so funny is my older children, I would not necessarily say that they confide in me all the time. They would some, but mainly it was their friends. Our baby girl confides in me all the time. And it's just because I've learned to put this into practice and accept, and then I'll give guidance afterwards and stuff like that. But what Gottman says is that you have to have 5 to 1. 5 positive interactions will override 1 negative interaction. And when you do have a negative interaction, you got to be very, I don't want to say strategic, because this is not, it's not a strategy or a game or anything, but intentional. You want to be very intentional that you have positive interactions. So I would say for me, you want to really strive to hit that 80 to 85% mark on having positive interactions with your spouse, accepting them. Again, you don't have to agree with negative behavior. You might have to, if you're going to come home drunk, I'm going to go stay with my mom for the night, something like that. If you're doing this or doing that, you need to get an Uber, something like that. I'm not going to come pick you up. So putting boundaries and stuff like that is okay, but still accepting them for who they are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. I find that, especially somebody in your situation, it's so easy to put yourself in kind of this victim mentality. You did this to me. I'm the victim of your actions and what you did and your affair. And it's this mindset that's like, I'm the one that was hurt, me. And that isn't helping the situation. I'm not saying that, that's not to say to dismiss anything, because it's not. You were the one that went through something. But you talked about this emotional maturity. When you can set that aside and be there for the other person, as hurtful as that is, and we know this because you and David reconciled.
Yeah.
Had you not have done that, had you not have been a safe space for him, maybe you wouldn't be here sharing this story if your emotions would have gotten the best of you.
Yeah. There's
the
so
worst
many
of you.
Yeah. There's so many things that I want to speak to that particular comment, because all these things started coming to my head when you were saying that. But one of the things was important that early on, whenever I first found out about the affair, probably 4 or 5 months later, I had a high school reunion, and I reconnected with an old friend. And we were friends in high school and stuff, like, and he always made me laugh and all that kind of stuff. And we connected, and I began to lean on him emotionally. And at that particular time, I didn't realize that was putting me in danger, like in the red zone. But then later on, I discovered that it was. And so I needed to address that. And so I talked to him about this and was like, I can't, this is going to lead to something else. And I have to fight for my marriage. And this is in complete conflict with me fighting for my marriage. And so I ended contact with him. And then at that point in time, I remember feeling so alone. And I knew, I guess, I think the Holy Spirit just began to reveal to me that the only one that I had was Jesus. That was the only one that I could emotionally lean on. And so David would emotionally lean on me, and I would not emotionally lean on him. He was not in the place where he could even, because anytime I would try to do that, it would push him further away from me, right? Because he didn't want to have to manage my emotions, because he was feeling all these emotions for this other person. So I knew at that point, and that was part of the journey of me learning to put God on the throne of my heart. And even to this day, if there's something going on, I'm like, okay, Lord, I'm leaning into you, and you are going to solve this. And I'm not going to give you suggestions, because back then I gave him a lot of suggestions. I'm not going to give you any suggestions at all, because I trust that you have this. The other thing is, in terms of the victim part of it, was there was a part of me that saw the brokenness in David. And the reason why I was able to recognize that is because, and I've said it several times on this thing, I was sexually abused as a child. And in my early 20s, I made a lot of negative decisions. It was like 19, 20, 23, something like that. And after I came out of all of that and really began to pursue God, I was able to see in myself that wasn't who I was. It's just what I did because I had unhealed pain. And as I allowed God, because that's the thing, we have to allow God, oh, God, heal me. Oh, God, change me and all that. But you have to have a surrender to yourself. You have to surrender it to God, right? And as I did that, God began to change those old desires. They went away, not immediately, but they did eventually go away. And so I was like, if I did those things when I am in pain, then David is doing these things because he's in pain. And I was able, and he had shared some dreams that he had, and definitely from his past and his relationship with his mom and all that kind of thing, that I knew that he was in pain. And it helped me reframe that he wasn't doing this to me. I was being affected by it, right? But like when you think about an alcoholic getting behind the wheel and driving while they're drunk, they're not saying, oh, I'm going to go out and purposely kill someone. No, it's a byproduct of what happens. And so it was the same thing. I understood that he wasn't doing it to me, although it was affecting me, it was affecting the kids, it was affecting my whole life. But he wasn't purposely trying to hurt me. So it helped me reframe that. And it helped me come out of the victimhood mentality. And you sent me a podcast yesterday, and I was listening. I've binge listened to it, and I finished it this morning. But one of the last things that the woman said, it was about the floods in Texas, and this woman lost her child that was 20 months old and all of that. And she had gone to yoga therapy, which I've never heard of, but that therapist told her, you have to come out of the water. You can't stay in the water with your baby. You have to come out of the water. And I was like, dang, that's good. And we have to decide to not to be the victim anymore. Did crappy things happen to you? Yes. But especially if you're a believer, this has been my favorite scripture forever, as far back as I can remember, that all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. And I was like, even this, God can turn around for my good, because even the sexual abuse God used, all the heartaches, some from other people, and then some I've caused myself, God has turned it all around for my good. But I have to let him, and I can't be a victim and let him at the same time, because I'm holding on to it, right? But if I surrender it, then God has the ability to work in our lives. That's what free will is about. We have to give up our will to take on what he has for us, right? And that was definitely a process. Sometimes I laid it down, sometimes I stood up back and forth, but eventually I was like, the time when I feel peace is when I've surrendered.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. That podcast was really emotional. There's just so much to learn from that entire podcast. And I think that as I was sitting there listening to it and thinking about what you and I do in our work, and anyway, it's not going to make sense to the people listening, but go listen to the podcast.
Tell them what it is. The name of it is. It's Where the River Took Us, I think.
Where the River Took Us.
Yeah. Texas Monthly. Yeah. They produced it, and it's great. It's great, man, to hear the story. It's heartbreaking, but also great at the same time.
Yeah. I told Melody yesterday, it's a really hard listen, but I'm so glad I listened to it. Yeah. Okay. We are going to come back for part 2. But before we do, because then in the next episode, we're going to talk about reconciliation and what that, but I want to ask you one last question. What are some, you did mention the organization that helped you understand what limerence was, but what are some other resources besides the Bible that helped you over that 6-year period?
Yeah, so many over time, like understanding limerence. But I would say the biggest one that had the biggest impact on me, besides the Word of God, was learning about my attachment style and really shifting my focus to fixing me. I hate saying it like that, because I don't know that you ever arrive at complete healing until we go to be with Jesus, and then he perfects it all. But we can stay on that journey of healing and growth and all that kind of thing. So I committed to my own growth, and I committed to it independently of what happened with David. Not initially, but as time went on, I was like, it's not sustainable to connect it with him. I have to be willing to do it myself. So learning about attachment style, I went to small group, and I didn't talk about myself. That was the other thing that was super important to me. I began to serve in any way that I possibly could. I spent time with friends, again, did my best not to talk. Now, there were some friends that I would talk to about, but it was very few. And just spending a whole lot of time with Jesus, for sure. Of course, I listened to different pastors preach. I listened to Jordan Peterson and Esther Perel and Gottman. I listened to all of them as well. So really, I just began to devour material as much as I possibly can. And that had a dual purpose. The first was, I got to be better. I got to heal. I got to not hurt and all that kind of thing. And the other one was like, one of these days, whether we stay together or we are apart forever, I want to help somebody.
Yes, awesome. And you're absolutely right. Romans 8:28, and God had a purpose for you in this situation and for David. And I feel so honored and lucky that God had our paths cross. So we can do what we do and help others. So I'm very grateful for that.
Let's talk about how our paths crossed real quick.
Okay.
Paths crossed because we began to work together at an organization. We were both coaches. So for me, that was the other piece. That was, I needed somebody to speak truth into my life that was not emotionally connected to my situation. And he did. And there were times I got mad at him, for sure, because I was like, you're wrong. But really thinking about it, I'm like, maybe he has no other motive other than to help me. And so I've got to process that. So coaching was also a big part of that journey.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Stay tuned for next week. We're going to go with part 2. We're going to talk about reconciliation and what Melody and David's relationship looks like today. So we'll see you next week.
Bye, y'all.